Well, good day, my friends. If you see that handsome looking gentleman behind me, that is not the old man in the sea. We are in Carolina Beach and he is a legend here. We're going to his grave and I'm going to tell you his story out at where he lived. That man was the Fort Fisher hermit, Robert HARRILL. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all. It begins right now. Robert was a local legend here, but he wasn't from here. He actually just decided one day, I don't like my life, and if I don't like my life, I'm gonna go at least try and find some happiness at the beach. He became a local legend, but died under mysterious circumstances in 1972. So it's really cool that 2024, we still have a mural remembering him. Let's go visit his grave and I'll tell you a little bit of his story. Hey everybody, you ready to see the hermit? He's buried out here at Federal Point Methodist Church Cemetery. So you can't drive up the trail to the cemetery, but you can apparently walk. And he's buried right, I believe, right out kind of outside. Said to look for a bunch of shells. So there's two cemeteries. You don't want the one inside this kind of modern fence. You want the one that says Newton Home Site Cemetery. And that is where you can visit this legend. I noticed a lot of people come out and visit him. You can see there's an American flag. Lots of stuff, very fitting. In fact, I love it. He used to have a pan hanging in front of his bunker. He took over, well, basically, you know, Robert's story is that he grew up in the mountains of South Carolina to kind of a poor family and was not treated very well. So when he would get screamed at, he would take off into the forest and hide. So later on in life, I guess it's probably not that surprising he would end up off by himself, initially anyway. Here's a documentary on him, but the cover's been kind of ruined by the precipitation. Some cigarettes. It says the Fort Fisher hermit. He made people think. He was born 1893, 1972. He eventually was married. But unfortunately, he just, he wasn't the kind of guy that was a good provider. He would make bracelets and dog collars and things like that and try and sell them. And if he wasn't doing well, he would apparently just take off to the mountains for long stretches of time. And his wife would work pretty much full time. They would end up having two boys. And Robert would, you know, kind of do this throughout their life to a point where his wife finally saw a job opportunity to be a maid in Pittsburgh, went up, interviewed for the job, got the job, and then moved her and the boys up to Pittsburgh permanently. Then eventually, apparently she divorced Robert and married the man that she went to work for. And Robert was living with his sister. He was working odd jobs and wasn't happy. So when the family had when he got married and they started having kids, he had bought a Model A Ford and converted it into like an early version of a Winnebago, like putting sides on it and everything, turning it into like a bus. And he used to bring the family to Carolina Beach. So he remembered those days, and since he wasn't happy where he was with his sister, he moved out here. He found an abandoned World War II bunker out at Fort Fisher, and there for a while he was out there alone. But he was a talker and he was very charismatic, and people would go out and visit the beach and they would happen upon him and he would invite him in. He would have, like I said, he'd have a pan hanging in front of the place and he'd say, if you're a man of common sense, you understand that that's for money, and if you don't understand that, then you should question your common sense. And they said he would talk politics and he would talk about the way the world was, and basically like a free thinker, This would have been out in 1955, and they said he was about a dozen years ahead of the hippie movement. They said he was so engaging that he went from being a guy that was like a hermit living in this abandoned bunker to a guy who had a guest book and received like 17,000 people a year. He would get as many people as like the park itself would get. Now at the time it was an abandoned World War II bunker, but apparently the government thought they owned the land, but they really didn't. So at one point a developer started trying to buy up the land around Robert's place and then wanted to force Robert out. People would, as nice as he was, and as many people that would come to visit him because out of curiosity and heard how, you know, interesting he was, he would also get the typical jerks and the drunks that just wanted to go out and screw with him. So apparently in those days when they were trying to get him to move out of the bunker, they were asking like several people to like go influence him to go move out of the bunker, and there were people that actually befriended him, so they said, no, I won't do it. So there was word that the developers had people go out there and try and strong arm out of there, and he still wouldn't leave. So we're gonna go out and see that bunker. I think that's the best place to continue his story, because it was out there that he spread his word. That's where people would go all hours of the night to visit him. They said even in the cold weather, he would be bundled up in like a jacket and everything, but if somebody came to see him and wanted a photo with him, he would take his clothes off down to like just the shorts and the hat that he was kind of known for, that old man in the sea look, and he would take the photo like that. So we'll go out there and tell you more about his life, how he got to stay, and then sadly the incident that happened that his family has forever believed that was that someone should be punished for, and we really have no resolution to it. This is the final resting place of 79-year-old Robert HARRILL, Fort Fisher Hermit. And there's like a fan club for him still. I actually brought some coins to leave because that was customary. If you came to visit him, you know, you tip him a little bit. But yeah, he has a fan club that still kind of celebrates his life and keeps his memory alive 50 years later. How wonderful is that? All right, good job, bud. Now we're gonna go out to Fort Fisher. So the hermit actually lived out at this bunker for 17 years, from 1955 till he died of a heart attack in 1972. But they believe that it was an induced heart attack by people basically out there screwing with him. Now we happen upon this four-wheel drive only trail. It's very likely probably what they would have used back in the day to access this, but they don't allow you to really drive on it as much anymore. This will take us back to the World War II bunker. Pedestrians only. If you look at the ground, the sand out here, it is a lot of broken shells. Lots of broken shells. That will come into play as to why they believe that Robert HARRILL there was foul play. It's kind of strange because the area embraces the hermit, but in a weird way, like there is a plaque that we'll see, but when they petitioned to put the plaque there, it was declined, and they put it up anyway, like his fans did. And at the time, the park ranger said, I'm not inclined to remove it anytime soon. It ain't hurting anybody. You may feel lost, but just keep looking for signs. As long as you're seeing signs, you're going the right way. It is about a mile hike to get out here. Also, one of the reasons they think there was foul play was because he was photographed hanging out with some people, you know, hours before he was found, and he was wearing love beads that he always wore, and when they found him, the love beads were gone. One thing I did read about Robert, they said that at one point in his life he was diagnosed as having schizophrenia and would hear voices telling him that he was like a bad person because of the way he would get yelled at when he was a kid. But it was talking to all the people out here that would put him in a good mood, and that kind of silenced those voices for him, he said. Right now we're currently 0.3 miles away. Giving you some of the experience. We're over top of salt marsh right now. Also, part of the reason I'm showing you the way out here is so you would see what he chose to live around for 17 years. They actually said that Robert was the closest thing to a celebrity that they had in this part of the country. So it looks like we are very quickly approaching. So at the time Robert came out here, it was just abandoned old bunker, and he decided to move in because he didn't have to pay rent. And here it is. So he lived out here for so long, people would say, why don't you deed this place? He said, well, then I have to pay taxes. But at the time he lived here, he cleared all this out. All this brush was gone at the time. And you could see photos of where this entrance is. He used to have a bunch of like driftwood making like an archway that he would walk in. He'd always be out here in that straw hat, like the old man the sea hat, and shorts. And he lived here. They said inside it would just be like tons of newspapers and cardboard and pretty much anything anybody would give him, he'd find a use for it. But he'd always have a pan hanging out here with a couple of like coins in it to let people know, like common sense, that you're supposed to donate money. And he said that's how he would live off of that. Or people would come out here, they would just love meeting him and invite him over to their homes for dinner. So like I said, some fans came out here eventually and put a plaque to him. Fort Fisher Hermit, called this deserted World War II bunker home from 1956 to 1972. He attracted thousands who shared his views of society, government, and the need of common sense. His body was found the morning of June 4th, 1972. His death is unsolved yet. His grave is at the Federal Point Cemetery, which we have already been to. So, people would come out here. He would entertain them. That's crazy to think that he would sleep in here. But yeah, he had all kinds of cardboard and stuff piled up in here, and apparently he left like a little section of cardboard back there where he would sleep, like in a little cubby hole. And apparently some people that met him and loved him came out here and tried to bring him a mattress one time, and he declined it. He's like, no, I'm happy with what I have. So he would always be out here spinning yarns, telling stories. This would, of course, like I said, all be cleared out and everything. He would have it very homey for him. And his dream was, apparently, he wanted to start a college of common sense. He believed he could get 2 more hermits like him that thought like him to teach, and a woman to be the secretary for this school. He believed that that was enough to really get it going. Now, what's interesting is that one of the local papers wrote a story about him one day, and like I mentioned, his wife had taken his sons off to Pittsburgh and never came back. One of his sons found the article, was living in Ohio, and came down a couple days later. He was like, that has to be my father. So he told the story himself. He showed up out here. He said he pulled up out in front of the bunker in his car, stood in the headlights. Like, let's imagine that the car was parked right here, stood in the headlights right here with his guitar and played a song that he wrote about an old gray-haired man, and it was about this old gray-haired man. And he said he played the song, and the hermit came out and looked at him. He said, who is that? And he looked at him a little closer. He said, is that my son Edward? And that's how they got back together. And Edward said he like felt bad for his dad. He was like, hey, you need to move up where we live to be with my wife and my kids and stuff. And he said, no, you need to move down here. You're working to support 9 kids. You need to be down here with me. He was living off of this property, like the salt marsh and stuff. He would find oysters and, you know, various sea life. He would cook up stews. People said he would find animals here and cook those up. And really cool to see that this bunker's still here. But unfortunately, you know, I kind of like mentioned that there was foul play. Apparently a group of teenage boys, 5 teenage boys, came out here one day with a pack of cigarettes as a gift. And that's why I was kind of like, thought that was interesting. They had the Lucky Strikes out at his grave. And they said they came out here and they called his name. There's actually a photo of them all kind of standing around here from when the cops eventually showed up. But they said that they looked over and that there was like pieces of board covering it, really like kind of shabbily. It wasn't done very well, and they left like a window on top. And they looked in, they saw him laying there, and said that they called his name and he didn't respond. And they said he was literally like right here. And there was like a 5-gallon bucket with his leg draped over it very unnaturally. One of the boys said that he yelled his name again. He said, "Hey, Hermit," and grabbed his big toe and wiggled it and said that the toe was cold. And he looked at his friends and said, "Boys, he's dead." So they came out and investigated. The sheriff did. They believed there was no foul play or anything. But one of the men that was out here, his name was Fred Pickler. Fred was actually, he had befriended the hermit and was out here. He had been out here many times taking photos, trying to put something together of like a documentary about this guy's life. And so he had befriended him. When he came out here, he was a low investigator with the sheriff's department. He was just out here to take the photos, and he said he saw enough evidence that he thought an autopsy needed to be done. He said the hermit had scrapes from shells on his face and on his chest. He had like an overcoat on that he slept in that was covered in sand. And his family, they thought, you know, basically, he said he told the sheriff that he worked for, "You need to do an autopsy." And they said, "No, there's no reason to do an autopsy. We don't see any foul play." Meanwhile, Fred Pickler took photos of drag marks leading from here out to the marsh. And what the family believes, what Robert Harrill's family believes, is that a bunch of guys got drunk and came out here to screw with him like people did, and he was 79 years old. They believe that they actually dragged him out of this bunker in his sleeping bag and were dragging him around the marsh, and that Robert had a heart attack because Robert had told several people he had been attacked out here by several different types of people. He'd even been kidnapped, where he was trying to hitchhike into town, and some guys like took off with him, and he sued them, like took him to court, and they got jail time. But yeah, there were drag marks and he was covered in sand and everything, and yet nothing was ever done. They never saw any reason. It's still unsolved. Family said when they came out about a week after he died, after his funeral and everything, started digging up the ground, they found like $1,000. But they said people had been, as soon as the hermit was dead, people were out here digging up the ground with machinery, trying to see if they could find anything. So wow, it's just a crazy story, you know, a legend that, like I said, he had a visitor's book that he used to have everybody sign. And when people come out here and call him a hermit, he'd say, "Well, I'm not really much of a hermit because I get 17,000 people a year. Those are friends." So it's kind of cool to see where he lived, and that it's still here, that they haven't gotten rid of it. You're allowed to hike out to it and everything. Kind of an interesting story. I love these kind of stories. So what their family was always hoping was, they said, you know, basically they had done their own investigating, and they said every turn they took, they just found more and more evidence that it was foul play. But too much has been covered up. They always just felt like the only way anybody would ever know the truth is for the people involved that came out and harassed him that night to come clean and confess. But never happened, probably never will. So rest in peace, Robert Harrill, the Fort Fisher hermit, man who lived life on his own terms. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a great night and goodbye.